Sometimes artistic inspiration comes from unlikely sources. Middle Tennessee artist Sydney Reichman recently found inspiration in a broken arm. Forced to stop making larger sculptures, Sydney began dabbling with sculpture in miniature by creating artistic jewelry. This wearable art gives her a chance to experiment with new techniques she hopes to someday use on a larger scale. It's not the first time an apparent setback has actually fueled her growth as an artist. For Sydney, the artistic journey is all about transformation.
I like fire, and I like texture.
To the untrained eye, these scraps of metal may appear mundane.
I work a little hot sometimes, which means you can blow through your work, but then that could add to something.
But for artist Sydney Reichman, they are portals to possibility.
Ooh, that's a nice form right there. You can just sort of see where it could go. It's somewhat figurative. Sometimes I find just the most gorgeous patinas outside. They'll have so much life on them, you can just paint sort of from that patina that happened.
Those patinas she loves are colored shapes created by the green film that forms on copper and bronze when exposed to the elements.
Leaf forms that I might have etched, or they may have etched themselves, and then I can just sort of use that as my base and just continue to write my journal on top of it in color and texture. The painting with fire is like the best. I'm just drawing on this metal right now, drawing with brass. When you use brass, you get sort of the most amazing flashes of red. On some days, it all has to do with atmosphere, actually.
Today, Sydney is sculpting in miniature, creating wearable art to be worn as jewelry. She heats the metal in a process called annealing.
It changes the molecular structure. It softens the metal,
making it pliable and more easily formed.
I love hammers that can create different textures and work. Ah, that's nice. This is a particularly lovely hammer when you're hammering something flat, not sculptural, because it gives so much beautiful texture, and once the texture is highlighted, it's just yummy.
Like the metal she transforms and reshapes, artist Sydney Reichman has herself been annealed by the fire of her artistic expression.
I wanted to be a jeweler, and it was the 60s, and I wanted to travel around in my van and sell jewelry all over the country. That was my dream. But I couldn't stand metal, and I loved clay. I loved it. I fell madly in love with it. It was magical to me. It's a very primal material. I think most people respond to it. It's something that's very deep in us. I was really into creating large vessels, and then I popped the large vessels off the wheel into hand building and wheel, and then I started working architecturally. I was really very bad at drawing pots in the beginning. It was a real struggle, and so through forming flowers and limbs and carving and etching, I covered up my mistakes, but that's actually where all my information about the work came from. I always think it's good to pay attention to your mistakes. They really give you a lot of information about where your work can move to. So they're really not mistakes at all.
The clay she loved was changing her artistically and physically. Faced with a heartbreaking realization she must give it up for health reasons, Sydney the artist was herself reshaped when she answered a call for a benefit art show and was asked to use materials she had never worked with before.
I created my first piece of copper, which was Copper Woman. She was 8 foot tall. I did it in a pit fire, like you do a raku fire out in the woods, and it was very successful. I'm good at accidental success before I have time to think about it. And so that got me so pumped up about copper, because copper felt like clay. It was very feminine and malleable, but you had to pound a lot of strength into it. It was very physical, but it was also kind of a dance. So if you could get into the rhythm of it, and go with it, you could bring that kind of joy into it. You were fighting it a lot, but it was the balance between finding the rhythm that worked and not fighting it, and sort of going with the flow of what it was doing, because it had a mind of its own, so you had to sort of work with it.
It was the perfect marriage for an artist who once hated working with metal, an organic relationship fed by the natural surroundings of her studio home.
Trees are like it. Tennessee trees are happening. They're the big life force for me. The long limbs are so sculptural and just inform me so much about form and movement, and oh, they're everything. You see the circle and cycle of life, the trees dying, the trees living, the trees coming up, the profile of the trees in winter, the sounds and sort of the vibrations of the earth. And you just tuned into all of it, and it sort of becomes part of your cellular core or cellular memory. And in a way, copper has a memory too. It's like everything that touches copper puts its imprint on it, whether it's your fingerprint, a leaf falling on it, acid producing some kind of ghost image, or just if you'll find something out in the woods back in my scrap pile, it's all imprinted with the history of what's happening. So even that is sort of a cycle that feeds into the land too, and feeds into the human condition of us also being imprinted with everything that comes through us and about us, you know, about the land, about what's happening on the planet.
Working with copper quickened Sydney's soul, but once again, the physical demands of her art began to take a toll.
You can only hammer for so long until the whole piece has to be annealed or fired, you could call it again, because the molecules start tightening up and getting very brittle. So you only take it to a point, and then you have to re-soften the whole piece and start all over. So you have to do that hundreds of times, literally, to each piece, because the hammering has to happen very slowly. You can't really force your will on it.
Or at times, your body. After years of repetitive hammering, Sydney's hands and arms rebelled, forcing her to explore something on a smaller scale.
I got involved in mixed medium metal pieces because they're more about storytelling. It was really fun and very clay-like to get back into these mixed metal pieces that sort of utilized a lot of the texture and surface treatments that I'd done in clay onto copper. And all that started with all the scrap that I'd cut off of these copper pieces when I was creating them. There'd always be the negative shapes left, and I was like, wow, those are so, I like that shape better, you know? And I thought, I gotta use that somewhere. And so at the end of the day, I'd take scrap and I'd make these little figures, little whimsical figures just for like fun. And then I started getting more into the scrap and doing things with it. So the scrap became a very part of the vocabulary of my work.
It's an artistic argot that's finding a more mainstream voice as people are able to join the dialogue at exhibits like this one in Nashville.
They come in and they're amazed. They look and they stay. You have to experience the work personally because it really resonates. People are experiencing the painting, which is, here's an illusion of space or place, and yet there is a sculptural element that says, and this is in your world also. So it's a different kind of interaction. It's the melding of the best of sculpture and painting together.
I want them to get out of it the experience that they're connected to it. It really becomes their piece and their story, and however they use it in their lives, it becomes part of them. I think that's why we're attracted to certain things. It has an element of who we are in it.
I think art should serve purpose. Beauty is a purpose within itself, and it's important. But to take that extra step and combine beauty with a message without being preachy, it's subtle. And I believe her pieces are like poems that you read through the years, and you'll come back and see it, and you'll get a little something different each time.
I live in a valley of water and light moving the seasons between soft, round mounds of moss and frosted stars.
Every part of Sydney's life is connected to her art.
I think if you're immersed in it, it just becomes part of your center, your core. I eat and drink these images, and they have become the seeds of dreams.
From the house she built herself to the land she works and loves.
I was a child of the 60s, and then the Back to the Land movement, it was just so appealing. Gardening, doing art, you know, building your own house, it was all a part of that. Creating your own universe, so to speak. It's still ongoing, it's still happening. It's ever constant, it's organic, and it just keeps moving and from one stage to another, but of course there's always the upkeep that keeps you connected to working on it constantly. So you gotta love it, you know. And it's real connected to the art. I mean, the land, the house, it's all, I think one feeds the other and is inspired by the other. This texture is the soil of soul and calls me home. Gut-driven and working across an alchemist playground, hammering a vision, welding the puzzle, pounding out a subtext, carving on the rhythm. Yeah, I love painting on metal. Painting on metal is dreamy. It's the beat of the earth, I work. A journey longing for form from chaos and madness to some kind of peace, built out of land, the hand, and a large dose of magic. Aluminum has a certain transparency and refractive light quality to it, so that when you're adding pigment, it becomes dimensional just because it gets a refractive quality. It's very nice.
It's a process of purification, a journey of self-discovery.
People say, well, you don't get into art to make, you know, a lot of money or be famous. And I think when you're young, you think that, oh, I'm going to be this famous artist, I'm going to be the next George O'Keeffe. I mean, I hear people say that. But I think as you get older and you mature into it, you realize that you were really doing it for the process. And the process really became my spiritual journey, I guess you'd say. It connected me to something bigger than me, you know, something out there that's huge, something's moving through me. And for me, if success is based on that, you know, I feel very good that I was able to experience all these different forms, and really the forms brought me out, brought what I had to say out, and inspired me to find some peace, find some kind of comfort, find a place in this world. Art has really helped me find that place that I could find myself and my spirituality and my journey.
As much as she enjoys her wearable art, Sydney longs to create on a larger scale again. With a body that struggles to physically manipulate her artistic ideas, she's considering the process of art fabrication, using someone else to do the heavy lifting, to transform her vast visions into creative commentaries.